Shalom Aleichem, good Erev Shabbos, Pasha Tzavim, the last Shabbos of the year, Tavshin Pei Aleph. We're going into Tavshin Pei Beis. Some say the year's an acronym for Tehei Shanas, Pu'ulis Beis HaMikdash. The Mikdash is not there, but the activity of Beis HaMikdash, or Tehei Shanas, full of brachas, full is a Yiddish word for full of blessings, or Tehei Shanas Parnosa Beharchava, much Parnosa. Rabbi Sai, ladies and gentlemen, it's down to the wire. It is down to the wire. As we say in classical colloquial English, it's crunch time. So what is it about this Shabbos that's crunch time? So I want to tell you a few stories with Rebbe Yoel that I saw myself and the Rebbe. Rosh Hashanah. I want to talk a little bit about Rebbe Yoel's Rosh Hashanah and the Rebbe's Rosh Hashanah. So, as I've mentioned in other clips, I had the schus, I had the merit of having private time, private conversations, eating privately with Rebbe Yoel and Rebbe Leah at their home many times. When I was a bacher, when I was a student yet in yeshiva, and even later as a married man when I returned from shlichus for different weekends and different things, I made it my business to visit them and to spend time. So this was Rosh Hashanah, I believe, 1982, Tavshin Mem Gimel. And Rebbe Yoel invited me to come to his house for the Sudas Yom Tov, for the Yom Tov meal, the first night of Rosh Hashanah. Now, in classical Chabad tradition, the first night of Rosh Hashanah is a very holy night. Now, what do I mean very holy night? Every Yom Tov is holy and every Rosh Hashanah is holy. But by Lubavitch Chassidim, by Chabad Chassidim, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, Chassidim would daven longer. They would daven at Barichas, they would daven Bavoida, they would learn Chassidus longer, they would reflect and meditate. And it was, in a way, it was a very somber night, a very quiet and stillfulness night. You know, in the Sichos of the Frierdiker Rebbe, it talks about the energy of the world. I mean, this it says in the Kabbalah, and the Alter Rebbe already brings it in Geras HaKodesh 14, that the energy of the world is dormant, retreats back to its source the first night of Rosh Hashanah, and we, through our blowing of the shofar and davening, we reinvigorate it. It becomes a new energy, Or Chodosh, for a new year. But at night, the world is coasting. The world is coasting, and who knows if Hashem will recreate the world in the morning. Our Rebbe would daven with the minyan, and he didn't stay after the minyan or daven much slower, where the minyan finished and they waited for him to finish. This was the conduct by the Rebbe Rashab and the previous Rebbe in 1944 or 45, Tavshin Hey. The Frierdiker Rebbe davened very long, for 2-3 hours, including a very long Shmoneh Esrei, and there were buckets of tears. They will see them who told me this, Rabbi Yitzchak Groner and Rabbi Leibel Posner and Rabbi Yisrael Gordon. Many of them, they were students then, and they remembered vividly. It left such a powerful impression for these American boys, or American cultured Lubavitcher 770 Bacharim students. Anyway, but the Rebbe didn't do that, at least not what we saw. Nevertheless, that doesn't detract from the tradition. What a Rebbe does is we learn what we need to from it, but the Rebbe said himself many times, it doesn't reduce and detract and diminish anything that the Rabbeim and Chabad Chassidim did for years and years and years. So I wanted to see how Rebbe Yoel, by Mashpia's davening Rosh Hashanah night. As a curious student and a close student, I felt I want to see this. So he was sitting, I found him sitting in the Cheder Sheni, in the small room next to the Beis Medrash upstairs in 770. That's where at that time we learned. And the next room was like adjacent, and for those that didn't have a place in the main room, they'd learned over there. Shabbos, Yom Tov, there were minyanim there later, different times. Anyway, the minyan downstairs finished, and I knew Rebbe Yoel had invited me. So I went to see where he is. And simultaneously, as I said, I wanted to see how he's davening, if he's davening longer. And all I saw was he's sitting on a bench as I came into the room from the corridor, the long hallway upstairs in 770. And he's sitting just with his eyes open, not his eyes closed, and just looking and thinking and looking and thinking and not speaking to anybody, totally elsewhere. And whether he noticed me or he didn't, I don't know, but I noticed him. And I couldn't kind of keep my eyes on him for too long, because then he would notice me, or it would feel very uncomfortable. So I pretended I'm looking for a sefer, I'm this or that. I maneuvered around the room a little bit and checking him out from all angles. And the total dveikus, the total meditative state of reflection and contemplation, I saw in his face and body posture, sitting there while people are passing to the left and the right and back and forth, and some are talking, and he's just elsewhere. That's what I saw myself. Then we came home, and there was the Suda. I don't recall if anyone else was there. It might have been I was the only one there at the time. And I remember thinking to myself that probably he's not going to speak because many people don't speak the first night of Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe didn't speak except very little at the Suda, and the Rebbe Shmuel and the Rashab were very careful to ask only a question or two, and really it was pretty silent and quiet. Well, Rebbe Yoel was normal. He spoke to me, and I spoke to him, and he spoke to his wife, not about nonsense, but about the concept of Rosh Hashanah, the concept of Achtoras HaMelech, coronation of the king, and it was really a very Torah-oriented, spiritual conversation. And that too was very, very eye-opening for me. Sometimes we think, we're going to be so holy and we're not going to talk to anybody. If you have a guest, you need to be pleasant, you need to say hello, and you need to make conversation, but make the conversation Rosh Hashanah night of more ruchnius, more Torah conversation. I never saw in him what we call the shtick. We call it in Lubavitch chitzonius dike shtick, superficial nonsense. That wasn't him. He was, like I've said before, he was ish bein anoshim. He was a person amongst people, and a very, very sweet person. Really, if you got to know him, he was such a sweet, delicious individual who exude honey. Mamish, a zizkeit, as we say in Yiddish, a pure zizkeit. But you had to get past the outer, and if he saw in a student or in a person that they're really genuinely interested in chassidus, in learning, in davening, in being an Oved Hashem, he allowed himself to be open, and the warmth flowed. And I saw this Rosh Hashanah night. So here I walked away saying, look, here is like the paradigm chassid, Chabad chassid. You talk about 200 years. Here is this chassid that comes from a pedigree of chassidim, midayra from generations. and Chassidim who were close to the Rabbeim, Chassidim who had Mesiras Nefesh. His father, Rebbe Folia, had Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice for Yiddishkeit. And here is Rebbe Yoel, the Rebbe's Chayzer, the person who was communicating and who set up and arranged Chabad Chassidus of the Rebbe from the very beginning. You would think that he's, crying and not wanting to be with people Rosh Hashanah night. It could be he cried, and it could be he was elsewhere. But all I can tell you is what I shared with you. And to me, this felt so wholesome, because there's an expression in Yiddish, zu Gott und zu Leid. Be godly and be a mensch, be human. The combination of both. For a moment, that year, 1982 Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe said a Maamar, Adonai Olam. And I recall that this Maamar was based on the Friedeker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe's Maamar, Adonai Olam, of Tafshin Gimel of 1942. And it's a very, very Haskalah Dika Maamar. Haskalah meaning the Maamar itself lends itself to intellectual ideas in a very deep way. And the concept that's discussed there is levels of Ratzon, levels of God's will, with wanting to be king, wanting to be a melech over us, a king over us. In Chassidus, in classical Chabad Chassidus, it's called Ratzon HaMuchlet. HaMuchlet meaning the absolute will that is not generated by an outside force, but comes from within God. Anyway, this is a deep concept, and there's many details, and it's known from the more difficult discourses of Chassidus to understand. And the Rebbe said a Maamar, Adonai Olam, with the same opening phrase as his father-in-law said, how many years before? 1943 to 40 years earlier. So it says 40 years later, a person understands what their teacher really meant when they taught it 40 years back, based on what it says in the Torah and Chumash Devarim. So the Rebbe Chazer, he reviewed that Maamar, and I remember 770, those that were into Chassidus it was 45 minutes. It was a very long Maamar, and it was profound and deep. And nothing. I managed to where I would stand by Fabrengen, across the Rebbe to the left. I was able to creep all the way up because it was Yom Tov. I wanted to hear it well, and I got very close up, almost next to Rebbe Yoel over there in the shul, in the way that between the two benches where people were sitting. They would rise for the Maamar, but there was like an aisle. And I was able to go all the way up all the way towards the front, and I was able to hear the Maamar, Baruch Hashem, well. And it was fascinating. Now, yes, I was 22 or so, and it was fascinating. But to say that I understood all the intricacies of the Maamar, I didn't. But I saw that Reb Shalom Charatonov and David Feldman and Tzvi Greenblatt and Reb Yoel and the Chevra are talking about the Maamar, and I could see that something here is going on. And then when I went with him to have another Suda during after, I think it was Mitzvah Rosh Hashanah, or maybe the following Shabbos, I forget when, and he reviewed the Maamar. It was Gevaldik. He reviewed the Maamar. This was my recollection of the Rebbe's Maamar, Tafshin Mem Gimel in 770. Of course, the Rebbe's Kiyas we've spoken about, and people have spoken about it. I don't have to tell you. And one last thing is that when we say Tehillim, Kapitel 24, not Mizmor LeDavid, which is Kapitel 23, but LeDavid Mizmor, it's brought from Rabbi Yaakov Emdim Siddur and the Mat Ephraim and the Rebbe Rashab say that if you have strong kavanah, when you say that Lashem Ha'aretz Maloya, that everything belongs to God and that God fills the world, you will be zeicha, you'll merit to have parnasa barchova, an abundance of livelihood and parnasa throughout the year. So here we have a recipe for for high success, strong success in parnasa, but it requires kavana, atzuma, strong kavana, when you say that psalm after the Shmon Esrei Rosh Hashanah nights, both nights, and then Yom Kippur night also after Ma'ariv. So it's an investment that Rabbi say that is worth the return. So too, the Rebbe Rashab says, if you dance with great excitement and great zest, Simchas Torah, the Torah, you'll also be zocheh to Parnasa Bar Chava. The main thing is that we should prepare ourselves the last few days and go to the Yoel. If you can't get there, to send a pidyon nefesh, to write a petition note to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, honor lo'ira rachmem rabim, I arouse abundant mercy for yourself and your wife and children and friends and anyone else that you should be nesayra. We should be aroused to tshuva shlema. That's what we add. That's special in this in this letter out of Rosh Hashanah when we write to the Yoel, or we go to the Yoel and we ask the Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe to be mishtadel, to be our advocate on high, to bring the petition notes, the panim, to the Eibush, as the Rebbe would walk in with bags, and the secretaries would carry bags, and then they would bring it up to the bima, and they were on the bima when the Rebbe blew the shofar with his talis over his head. It was awesome, awesome, awesome. And the Rebbe's face turned red when he blew, and it's a whole, we need a whole clip for itself to describe the Rebbe's face, and the blowing of the shofar, and the panim. It was, and then when he went back to the bima, he turned around. I believe it says in Kabbalah, the Baltakeya, the one blowing the shofar, should see everyone. He would turn around, slowly looking at everyone in the crowd. Abba Isai, all of this exists still. Don't think it's gone. It's not gone. It's here, because it's what you make of it. You can be with the Rebbe in 770, this Rosh Hashanah, looking at him and he looking at you and hearing the shofar. How can I say that? How can I say that? The answer is, it's a mindset. If you work and you toil and you study and you meditate and you reflect, that's who you are. The famous word, Sham ata nimtza. The machshavte shel adam, the thought of a person, that's where the person is. Not where physically you land your feet and your body and your house. It's where the machshava is, the thoughts of a person are. Wishing everyone a ksiva v'achsima teva, shana teva, musuka, with good gebenchte yor, poshet gash begashmi, is good health, better health, happiness from the children and grandchildren, sheduchim tovim for everybody, parnosa bar chava, tremendous amount of parnosa, and the ikar, bias Mashiach tzidkenu, Mashiach should come in a revealed way, that we should be able to say, Hine zeh, this is Mashiach, and point to him, and he'll take us to Yerushalayim and HaKodesh, to the Beis HaMikdash, and we'll be zeicha to do it kulanu kle'echad, all together as one nation, one people, which is the theme of this video series of bringing Yidden together, whether you're Chabad, or you're Satmar, or you're Litvish, or you're Sfardim, or you're not yet religious, we're all one people. L'chaim, l'chaim, go with simcha, come with simcha, and we'll see each other very soon, B'Karav Mamish. Good Erev Shabbos.